So I'm walking up from our lake in northern Wisconsin. It's in the, must have been in the late 70s. And this thought hits me. I mean, it's one of the few times where a thought really struck me as a kind of epiphany. And the thought is that there's an herb code in the immune memory of DNA. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Well, it meant that I could put together, in a sentence, herbology, molecular biology, and immunology. And I was interested in the notion of an herb code in the sense of how we've been coded for herbs through the selection of given plants over thousands of years that make these plants effective for us medicinally. And that seemed to be a very interesting thought. And I kind of wanted to relate it to immunology because I'd taken a great interest in that because of the herb thyme. Because the herb thyme, Thymus vulgaris, is the same word as the thymus gland. So I thought, well, if it's the same word, they must have some correlation. And not only because they go back to a Greek word, thumos. That's the original root word, of which thymus is the cognate. Thumos goes to the Latin, thymus. I found out that the herb thyme had germicidal and disinfectant properties, so it would be good for one's immune system. It's very mild in that respect, but therefore safe. And I thought, well, maybe that's why it's such a major culinary herb, is because it cleanses what it touches. And I found out it was grown in public places for people to step on to release the aroma into the atmosphere because it had a cleansing effect. It was burned as incense on altars. They even had a group of men and women who would dance around the altar and inhale the vapors of the thyme. So I was extremely interested in immunology as a result of the herb thyme and took a deep interest in it and read a lot about it. And it was about the time that immunology was just coming into a major science that had not been all that evident up until, I'd say, maybe the 60s or 70s. The thymus gland was a kind of anomaly. They weren't really clear about what it was good for. In fact, they used to surgically remove it if it was big and healthy. It was called a thymectomy. And then they found out it was the center of the immune system. And in the old days, DNA was called thymonucleic acid until they found its helical structure. So there's an herb code in the immune memory of DNA. We're programmed for herbal health care. It's the botanical basis of health care. So let's go back to the Chadwick Garden because that was the major inspiration for me for eventually entering into the herbal industry in this country. We had an herbal company in Santa Cruz named the Famali Herb Company, and I found out about it. So I went to meet Ben Zaracore and Louise Veninga, who ran the company, and they were pioneers in the reestablishment of herbal products for herbal health care. And they gave me a job. I mean, I didn't exactly know why. All I knew about was the herb thyme. And I sat at a desk and wrote out different herbs and their properties and so on. And I guess they somehow thought that I would be their nominee for the Herb Trade Association, which they had helped organize for developing herb trade nationally. And so I got the job. I became executive director of the Herb Trade Association about 1977. And it was called my bluff because I couldn't always turn the conversation to the herb thyme in order to talk about anything. So I knew I had to develop a repertoire and become knowledgeable in the field. And so I did. I sat down at my typewriter and wanted to know the origins of the herbal tradition in ancient Greece. I taught Greek philosophy at the university for many years, so I wanted to go back to the origins of the tradition in order to overcome the short circuit that had happened in the transmission of the tradition in my lifetime, specifically with respect to my father. My father was a doctor in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His office was in our home, attached to our home. And he was the son of immigrant Norwegian farmers, and he knew nothing about herbal health care. He was the first of the generation, I think, to demonstrate that it had been completely eliminated from the training and practice of herbal health care practitioners, from the professional practice. He remembered vaguely something about Echinacea, but he didn't really remember what it was good for. He remembered vaguely about grinding digitalis leaf in a mortar and pestle before it became standardized. That was it. So I realized that a short circuit had occurred in the transmission of the tradition. And I wanted to be the one, now that I had become the executive director of the Herb Trade Association, where that short circuit was overcome. So I went back to ancient Greece. It was a funny experience because I had a woman from Findhorn who came to visit me. Do you remember Findhorn? Yeah, it was a famous garden in Scotland where everything grew 10 times what it's supposed to be. And we were on a kind of wavelength with them with our Chadwick garden here at the university because we were both coming off of the tradition of Rudolf Steiner and biodynamics. Same with Findhorn. So she sought me out visiting Santa Cruz because of the Chadwick garden, and we sat and talked for a while about being guided. And she told me about how at Findhorn they asked for guidance. Well, I'd never asked for guidance. Now, I was the executive director of the Herb Trade Association, and let me tell you, I needed guidance. So I said, please guide me in discovering the origins of the herbal tradition in ancient Greece. So I wanted to reestablish the transmission from who to 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 me. And I had an herbal from the University of Texas, a master's degree on the herbal plants of Texas. And I thought, okay, I'll call my effort to develop this instructional manual, The Long Lost Herbal of Cabeza de Vaca. Now, come on, bear with me. Cabeza de Vaca was a Spanish conquistador who came to the shores of Florida in the 16th century, 1528 or thereabouts, under the expedition of Narvaez, 4 ships, about 700 conquistador, and it totally founders. There's only 4 left alive, one of whom was Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca. And he and the 3 others walk from the shores of Florida to Mexico City. It takes them 8 years. And they're the first to cross the United States. And so I thought, okay, I know about the anecdote where he was in the region of El Paso and the Indians there say, heal our sick or die. And so he prays over the sick Indians and they're instantly healed. It's a miracle. And so they initiate him into the herbal medicine of their tribe, and they provide him with hundreds of Indians for safe conduct into Mexico City. There's a wonderful Mexican film of this, very surrealistic, but it depicts this journey of Cabeza de Vaca. And so I thought, okay, I'll ask for his guidance and his blessing on the herb renaissance in the United States, now that we were about to recover and reaffirm the botanical basis of healthcare. And the question I asked was, what's its origin in ancient Greece? So I opened the herbal from the University of Texas, and the first herb was yarrow. And I thought, well, I remember Chadwick talking about yarrow, and it grew in the garden, and he pointed it out to me. but hadn't really paid attention to the Latin binomials that characterize every medicinal herb. It's a classification system begun by Linnaeus, and it gives every plant two names for genus and species. And so I looked at the binomial of yarrow, and it was Achillea millefolium. I thought, is this the herb of Achilles? Yeah, what do you think Achillea means? Why? Well, because it's a styptic. And Achilles used yarrow to heal the wounds of his comrades at Troy. If you apply it topically, it stops bleeding. Okay, second herb. It was the herb of Artemisia, the goddess of the woods, the hunt, and the moon. Wormwood. I thought, well, what do you know? It's the second Greek in the sequence, although she preceded Achilles. She was the one who introduced Chiron the centaur into herbalism. That actually turned out to be the third herb that I encountered, Centauri. And Chiron the centaur was a horseman who ran an herb school from the foot of his cave at the foot of Mount Pelion. And Achilles and other heroes of Greece were apprenticed to him to learn about herbs that Artemis had taught him. So I had Artemis, Achilles, Chiron the centaur, and the next one, I swear to God, was Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, for whom the milkweeds are named. So, I mean, it's the only time I've ever asked for guidance. I think it scared me to have it fulfilled in this way that answered my question. So I had the beginning of the tradition. And from there on, I could follow the sequence of herbal knowledge and of the great herbals. Theophrastus, the student of Aristotle, Dioscorides, who came after him, the two major herbals that went through the whole tradition up until the Renaissance Reformation, when herbal books spilled out and became a major issue of publishing and so on. So in a way, I was able to reestablish the transmission of the herbal tradition intact from its beginning to myself. So as a result of organizing the national herb trade, I developed 4 herb symposia at UCSC, and we brought in everybody that was kind of hiding out in various disciplines. There was no discipline of herbalism. There was no national credence that was given to the science of herbology. There was the science of pharmacognosy, which we found out about, a subset of pharmacology, which deals with the medicinal properties of plants. It was fading out in the country. There were still 1 or 2, maybe 3 centers and medical schools in the country, diminishing, but we called out guys from there. There were figures in medical botany. That was still operative, and so on. And various figures in chemistry and whatnot that had an interest in the chemistry of herbal plants. So we had these 4 major herbal symposia in 4 consecutive years that brought in this resource to the development of the herb trade in this country. We invited a major delegation from China, the first such, and they came, and in turn they invited me to go to China to visit various herbal centers in China. It was a wonderful trip, about 1982, so it was early, before China had really taken off. It was still old China. And I was asked to give a talk to a group of health professionals in Beijing, and there were about 100 there, and I spoke. It was really difficult because I had to speak in English and I had a translator, so after every sentence in English, the translator would translate it in Chinese. I had no idea what it came out as. And I was dumb enough to talk about the herb code and the immune memory of DNA, which I could hardly interpret to myself. And there was this smart aleck looking guy sitting in the front row, and I thought, uh-oh, he's going to be the first to ask a question. I'll bet he's a physicist. Yeah, it turned out he was. And he raised his hand, and in perfect English, he said, Dr. Lee, what evidence do you have for this herb code in the immune memory of DNA? I didn't know what to say. I said, I made it up. And this intake of breath in the group, I thought, uh-oh, if I don't trip, maybe I can make it to the airport and get out of here. So anyhow, that was as far as my theme about the herb code and the immune memory. But I have to say that because of the connection between the herb thyme, Thymus vulgaris, and the thymus gland, and reading as far as I could in immunology, that I pioneered herbs that are good for the immune system. It was my main theme while I ran the Herb Trade Association. And we discovered Breckmann in Russia that was using Eleutherococcus sanicosus as what he called an adaptogen that assists the immune system in adapting and is a great assist for one's health care. We found a Chinese representative, an old Chinese immune system pair of herbs, astragalus and ligustrum. It was called, what's it called? So I can't think of the Chinese name for it now. Anyhow, there was a long Chinese tradition about herbs influencing the immune system, and in a way the entire Chinese system of herbology relates to the immune system as a way of balancing the body in whatever direction it needs to be balanced. And so it was a great experience to find herbs that were specific to enhancing immunity, and it was really, for me, one of the principal discoveries and contributions that herbalism made to American healthcare. So it was a great adventure. I had a wonderful time involved with this, made many friends. It was a contribution I was proud of. Before that, I had actually started a restaurant in Santa Cruz with Paige Smith, my great pal, called the Wild Thyme. And I tried to think of developing a new national cuisine based on the herbs instead of, the dispensable garnish, which is what parsley was sacrificed for. I wanted to make a cuisine that was dependent and where the herbs involved were featured in the dishes. And so I couldn't really bring it off at the Wild Thyme. I wasn't a restaurateur. It was a very difficult business. We ran it in the basement of Cooper House when that was still there. I tried to get a thyme hamburger. No, there was a terrific recipe in Julia Child. I thought we'll make that a feature of the restaurant, along with thymus glands. I could go around and talk to people about the relationship of herbalism to their immune system, which I did. And one of my favorite dishes of French cuisine are riz de veau, which are thymus glands. And so people complained about the hamburger because they thought it was pork, because they associated the taste of flavor of thyme with pork. And so the kitchen laughed at me, and that was about the end of my influence on herbal cuisine at the Wild Thyme restaurant. So I started an herb school here in 1980, preceding Elizabeth. And she has, in a way, been my successor. We ran it for 2 years. We had a grant for that period of time. It was a little ahead of the game, so we weren't able to continue it. But I'm so appreciative of the work that she has done. And I'm so appreciative of you all coming out here to support it and to be cheerleaders for the herb renaissance, which is now taken off in a fantastic way. And so thanks again for coming, and nice to see you all here.